Why the Soviets never built their Darkstar DSB-LK. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Union worked on a top-secret project that may have resulted in the fastest military aircraft ever constructed, the ultimate bomber. So swift that not even the SR-71 could keep up with it. The hypersonic flight would have rendered this aircraft unstoppable, allowing it to destroy any Western metropolis without the inhabitants even recognizing it, or to destroy a U.S. carrier group before it was detected on radar. Was this Russian invention utterly insane or a workable idea that may have altered history forever? We're discussing Mach 5 with the DSB-LK bomber today. Let's face it, the Cold War era's aviation history was probably at its coolest in the late 1950s and 1960s. Engineers were allowed free rein to develop the ultimate weapons, which could deliver nuclear bombs to the targets on the other side of the Iron Curtain. In any future conflicts or proxy wars between the USSR and the United States, these bomb and design advancements would provide tactical and political advantages. However, there was a significant issue with many of these bomber projects: interceptors. The West and East were engaged in a never-ending game of rock, paper, and scissors, in which they were competing to create the fastest bomber and, in turn, the fastest interceptor. The Soviet Union was developing a nuclear bomber that could fly as fast as the hypersonic nuclear missiles it carried, and the United States would eventually convert the SR-71 into the YF-12, the fastest interceptor of its kind. This Soviet initiative had a much stranger beginning than many of the others that you have probably heard about so far. The Leningrad Military Aviation Engineer Academy initiated it, and Alexander Moskalev served as its director. Moskalev was an unusual figure and an aerospace engineer who designed his first aircraft when he was just 26 and his first flying prototype when he was 29. He was truly an engineering prodigy, in contrast to the larger engineering business better known for their work on aircraft like MiG or Sukhoi. By the time he was in his 40s, he was a well-known aerospace engineer who had begun developing a novel idea for a supersonic seaplane bomber. And they are, to put it simply, absurd. From the duck design to the tailless, and of course the flying wing, various shapes were employed, and he believed that this final design had the most promise. He decided it was time to put a stop to the fight of the interceptors once and for all after hearing of the ongoing one-upping between capitalist Americans and the domestic Soviet bureaus. As a result, the DSB-LK was created, yet it was also in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Long-Range Strategic Bomber Flying Wing, also known as the DSB-LK, is a futuristic aircraft design that prioritizes speed over all other factors in order to give the Soviet Union ultimate control over U.S. air defenses. First of all, Moskalev was traveling at speeds ranging from Mach 2 to Mach 4. To confront this new Soviet threat, a fighter derivative such as the YF-12 design would have been available even if the SR-71 had been produced at the time. So much for planning ahead, but his quest for unrestricted speed didn't end with this. Combined ramjets and possibilities for afterburning turbojet engines were considered, which would have increased the maximum speed past Mach 4. Hypersonic is being talked about here. The estimated range of this aircraft was over 16,000 kilometers, and these speeds would have been at exceptionally high altitude of approximately 30 kilometers or 100,000 feet. Depending on where it launches, this would enable the DSB-LK to attack practically anywhere in the world from the USSR itself. The flying wing portion of the name refers to the way the aircraft's fuselage and wing would have merged, and this would provide the lowest possible drag during flight and the highest possible payload for warfare. But you're undoubtedly asking yourself how they could possibly build such an airplane. Titanium was selected as the material of choice because it could withstand high speeds. This beast was to be propelled by a total of 6 engines, spaced out in pairs of 3 in 2 gondolas. The USSR was the primary producer of the building material at the time, thus getting it wouldn't be an issue for them, unlike the SR-71, which had to employ shell firms to obtain it. This enormous object had a 50-meter length and a 37-meter wingspan. 3 to 4 crew members would be housed in 2 separate compartments on board. They would probably serve as 1 to 2 weapon officers or navigators in addition to 2 pilots. Given the size of the airplane and the strength of its engines, 15 to 20 tons of ordnance would be possible to carry. This was quite a feat given the 18 to 23 tons of the B-2. Standard payloads would typically consist of nuclear weapons or enormous Fawn 5000 bombs. Do you know about the HA-45 hypersonic missiles that are now being created for the T-4 Satka? While they undoubtedly would have been adopted by the DSB-LK, which would also turn this aircraft into the ideal aircraft carrier killer. With a nuclear option installed, the HA-45s could obliterate an entire U.S. carrier group in one action. There would be no way to combat it. You may also have noticed these little turrets dotting their surface while we're on the subject of defense. These 4 remote-controlled turrets, 2 on top and 2 below, each held 12,000 rounds. Additionally, the jet may be equipped with air-to-air missiles to give another level of protection against any sneak attacks. There was even talk of an electronic warfare version and a spy version of this aircraft, which was beyond overkill. Similar to the SR-71, it could fly as quickly as its missiles detonate from a great height while remaining almost invisible, or even before Lockheed Skunk Works even dreamed of building the SR-71. So the crucial question is, why, if this plane was so obviously ahead of everything else in the globe, did we never see it? The Darkstar was never ever developed beyond the concept stage. According to some stories, it was purely an academic experiment to gather data for the next aviation initiatives. Others claim that the long-range strategic bomber was no longer necessary with the development of the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM. The space race began in the 1950s, and the Soviets, who wanted to build an ICBM, had a head start thanks to the development of the R-7 Semiroka. This served as the final nail in the coffin for numerous USSR supersonic bomber efforts. The project received approval in the early 1960s to proceed with wind tunnel experiments, but only 6 months later, it was unexpectedly abandoned. With the ability to launch an ICBM and reach a target on the other side of the world, there was simply no need for a super or even supersonic aircraft. On this project, Moskaloff collaborated with the Zaghai Institute and other significant institutions from the USSR, but they never managed to secure enough financing to move past the prototype stage. Although the idea was highly praised by officials and was considered to be very practical, it was at the same time both futuristic and out of date, because nuclear warfare had been completely altered. It's interesting to note how the US's X-47B design mimics the DSB-LK and its flying wing configuration. Some of the discoveries made during this project were later applied in the development of new Soviet bombers.